morning, good afternoon, good evening, all. It's Bear here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, aboxwithnolid, a channel that I've created to not only bring awareness and understanding, but also delve into the mechanisms of complex trauma and to learn ways and create ways of healing. Now, in today's video, the next one along in the adoption series, I want to start to explore or teach you guys or make you guys aware and break down the understandings of a split second that dictates literally the success or the dynamic of that adoption relationship with the adoptive parents. It literally comes down to a split second. It's the natural progression from what we've come from in the last video when I talked about, being left in that box. It's that moment of that they can claim that being left isolated prepares you for, to attach. Now, that moment, in the movies it's played out as all nice and cool, everybody's happy and crying and it's all good. In the real world, it very, very rarely goes that way. Because what's at play? Firstly, when you look at the adoptive parents, and this is not a criticism, this is a reality, there's the reasons that they are choosing to adopt. What has put them in the predicament or the situation where they're choosing to adopt and not have their own children? Or they have biological children and they choose to adopt, which adds another whole layer of difficulties, which I'll get to in another video. But there's all the expectations and all that emotions of what am I going to feel when I pick this infant or child up, and how am I going to make that infant or child mine? It is normal and natural. There's the trauma if the adoptive parents can't conceive, if they've had miscarriages. There's the trauma if they've lost a child and they're too old and they can't conceive again, or there's too many risks, there's medical. There's all these layers of reasons behind wanting to adopt a child. And in our modern society, there's validation of being a family when you bring in same-sex couples. A lot, and I don't care if I piss people off. There's a lot of the driving force with same-sex couples to adopt is they need validation that they are a real relationship. They need validation that they are a real family. And that expectation is part of that child's responsibility to fulfill. And I've been around this stuff many, many years, and I've sat across many, many meetings to understand this. This is not an assumption. This is what organizations pushing for the validation of same-sex adoptions here in Australia and in other countries. This is one of the driving reasons for it. But I digress. The putting down to that moment, there is all the expectations of the adoptive parents that are there, their heightened state. And then you bring in an infant or a child that comes from trauma. Removal is trauma. However it plays out, it's trauma. And in the next video, I'll get into those two states. But in this one, you've got a traumatized, highly freaked out infant or child who walks into that wall of emotion, of expectation, of need, of all the pheromones and all that intensity that the adoptive parents are putting forward, whether they try to or not. It's there. There's infant goal, there is an interaction and a response. And if that infant or child does not meet right there and then exactly what is perceived or required by the adoptive parents, it shapes the entire relationship from that moment on. Because you're either their child or you're not. Everything comes down to that moment. In my own personal experience, I cried. My adopted mother, who came from the miscarriage background, they weren't informed. There was nothing around it back then. There really actually isn't around resolving or counselling for them now. I was supposed to fix all that, but I didn't. I cried. So immediately I was placed back down. I rejected her. And I've been reminded of that rejection every moment of my life. And I know of countless other adoptees who've had the same experience. It literally shapes the success or failure of adoption, is that moment. And that's what I'm trying to get across in this video. Is, there are adoptions out there that have worked. That's because that moment worked. There's enough epigenetic similarities. There's lots of aspects at play, but essentially, that moment worked. The baby or infant responded exactly the way the adoptive parents needed them to. And it worked. But as the majority of adoptions, to varying degrees of failure, don't, in the only study in existence, and I'll post the details of that study in the comments, in the description, that I'm aware of, shows that over 70% of adoptions don't work. And largely it comes down to that moment, because that shapes the whole experience of what the adoption relationship is. There's a reason why so many adult adoptees that don't even know they're adopted. We call them late discovery. It's devastating when they find out. And a lot of the times in their 50s and 60s, they find out. I personally have known a few. It's because the adoptive parents want that kid to be theirs. And I'm trying to not go too triggery into the details of this. And it's really, really hard because it's stuff that needs to be understood. But all I want you guys to understand is it all comes down to one freaking moment. And that is what needs to be understood. Because one of the driving things I've tried to do to bring awareness and change to how adoption works is adoptive parents need to be taught, and there needs to be counseling, there needs to be work done to balance those expectations and to create the understanding that you're raising somebody else's kid. Regardless of whether it's an infant or a child, you are still raising somebody else's child. There are biological differences, there are epigenetic differences, there's background differences, there's inherited memories and genetic trauma responses. There's so many layers there that need to be worked with and understood by the adoptive parents. But the system won't go there because they think you won't have any adoptive parents. Well, that's the reality that needs to be there, needs to be understood. When I sat in rooms full of the heads of different organizations that facilitate adoptions, you will be astounded at the dismissiveness of the effect and impact it has on adoption. All these components around removal trauma, attachment trauma, they don't care. Basically, they want their 10 grand a kid. And that's literally, in most cases, what these organizations get is 10 grand per successful placement. The consequences are up to those involved. Well, if the adoptive parents are not prepared, and they have no concept of understanding, bar what the brochures and the person they're talking to has told them, the infant and the child have literally no preparation. And as I said, it comes down to that one moment. So please get your head around that and open your eyes, because in our world today, adoption is going to grow due to the dysfunctionality we have in our societies. There's going to be more and more children placed in this situation. And if you are exploring the paths of becoming an adoptive parent, please learn. There are adoptees, and I'm one of them, that are open to be reached out to, where we will talk with you. Not accuse you. I'm not here to harm you. I'm not here to judge you or turn you off. But I am here to make you aware of the reality of what you're stepping into for the best interests of the child, us. We are the completely innocent party that has no choice and no say. We were taken or we were given up. We had no say in it. We're not choosing to do anything. We are the innocent party in all of this. Yet we have the responsibility to carry all the cost. All of it. If the adoption fails young enough, there are numerous cases where the kids are sent back. I remember in the media not too long ago, an American adoptive mother, she threw their 5-year-old Russian adoptee kid on a flight by themselves, one ticket, one way back to Russia. I know of instances here where in the country adoptions, Asian kids were dumped straight back into the system. They were brought in from Indonesia and the Philippines. And because the relationships, the struggles that came with having a child in that relationship, within 5 or 6 weeks, they were just thrown into foster care. And that, especially when they're children, that destroys them. The aftermath of that is hugely devastating and long. We are the innocent ones here, yet we carry the burden. We carry the responsibility and we carry the accountability. And that's what I'm trying to do with these videos, is to share that accountability, at least in the understanding out there wherever these videos go. So remember, the success of an adoption comes down to a moment. And the responsibility of how an adoption plays out comes down to the adults, not the child. So I am grateful for your understanding in watching these. I'm open, and as I said, I love your guys' questions and comments. I will be monitoring any comments. If they start becoming destructive, I will remove them. Because I want this to be about an awareness thing, about an understanding thing, and in the future videos, and also a healing thing. But the world needs to know what we carry. So be kind, be gentle. And as I said, in all these adoption videos, if you're a part of adoption, these will be triggering, especially the next one. Be mindful, be kind, be gentle, and I'll see you next time. Ho.